The auctioneer's gavel slammed down with finality, and not a single hand had risen for lot number 47, Crimson Dawn. A 3-year-old chestnut mare with uneven white markings and a slight limp in her left hind leg stood in the auction. Ringa's buyers turned their backs and walked away. Her coat was dull, her spirit broken, and her bloodline, while technically respectable, had produced nothing but disappointments on the track. Harlow Crestfield pushed through the dispersing crowd, his weathered hands gripping the metal rail. At 62, the retired farmer had seen enough broken dreams to recognize potential where others saw only problems. His neighbors in Millbrook County thought he'd lost his mind when he'd sold his prized Holstein cattle to pursue horse training, and they'd think he was completely deranged if they knew what he was contemplating now. "Nobody wants her," muttered Vaughn Stormwater, the auction house manager, approaching with his clipboard. "Poor thing's been through 3 trainers already. Last one said she's got no heart for racing spooks at Shadows, won't take direction, and that limp gets worse under pressure." Harlow studied the mare's eyes. Where others saw defeat, he glimpsed something else, a flicker of intelligence, perhaps even defiance. "What's her reserve price?" "Reserve," Vaughn laughed bitterly. "Friend, at this point, if you can pay the transport fees and promise she won't end up at the glue factory, she's yours for $500. The crowd had thinned to a handful of bargain hunters picking through the rejected lots. Successful. Breeder Quinton Ashworth stood near the exit, shaking his head as he spoke to his assistant. "That Crestfield fellow's about to make the biggest mistake of his life. You can't turn a quitter into a champion, no matter how much heart you think you see." But Harlow wasn't listening to the doubters. He was remembering his grandfather's words from 40 years ago. "Son, sometimes the world gives up on something right before it's about to bloom." His grandfather had been talking about a drought-stricken cornfield that everyone said should be plowed under, but which later produced the best harvest in county history. "I'll take her," Harlow announced, pulling out his worn checkbook. Vaughn's eyebrows shot up. "You sure about this? She comes with a stack of veterinary bills and a reputation that'll follow her everywhere." "I'm sure." As the paperwork was completed, word spread quickly through the tight-knit horse community. By evening, Harlow's phone was ringing with calls from concerned neighbors and amused competitors. Delilah Moonwright, president of the County Horse Association, called to express her sympathies for his purchase. "Harlow, honey, I respect what you're trying to do, but that mare's been written off by some of the best trainers in 3 states. The most cutting call came from Beaumont Silverdust, owner of the region's most successful racing stable. "Crestfield, I heard about your latest acquisition. I'll save you the embarrassment and buy her off you for $1,000, double what you paid. Use the money to get back into farming where you belong." Harlow politely declined every offer in piece of advice. That night, as he prepared a stall in his modest barn, he spoke quietly to Crimson Dawn. "I don't know what hurt you before, girl, but whatever it was, that chapter's closed. Tomorrow, we start writing a new one." The mare's ears flickered forward, the first sign of interest she'd shown all day. 3 weeks into training, Harlow's methods had become the talk of Millbrook County, and not in a good way. Instead of the aggressive conditioning programs favored by established trainers, he began each morning by simply sitting in Crimson Dawn's stall, drinking his coffee and reading aloud from old farming journals. Neighbors driving past his property would slow down to stare at the peculiar sight of a grown man, apparently having conversations with a horse. "That man's lost his ever-loving mind," declared Prudence Goldwater, the county's gossip coordinator, during her weekly bridge game. "Yesterday I saw him playing classical music to that reject horse while brushing her coat. Mozart, if you can believe it." But Harlow's approach was methodical, rooted in decades of understanding animal psychology from his farming days. He'd noticed that Crimson Dawn's pupils dilated and her breathing became irregular whenever anyone approached with urgency or aggression. Previous trainers had interpreted her hesitation as laziness. Harlow recognized it as trauma response. The breakthrough came on a foggy Tuesday morning in October. Instead of the usual forced training routine, Harlow had simply opened Crimson Dawn's stall gate and walked toward the practice track, not looking back to see if she followed. For 10 minutes, she remained frozen at the threshold. Then, step by tentative step, she began trailing him at a distance. "That's it, girl," he murmured without turning around. "Your choice, your pace." For the first time since arriving at his farm, Crimson Dawn completed a full circuit of the track, not because she was forced to, but because she chose to. Her gait was still uneven, her speed mediocre, but her ears were forward and her tail carried high. Word of Harlow's unusual methods reached Sterling Hawthorne, a sports journalist for the Regional Racing Gazette. Intrigued by the story, he drove out to interview the eccentric farmer-turned-trainer. "Mr. Crestfield," Sterling began, setting up his recording equipment, "industry professionals are calling your training methods soft and unscientific. How do you respond to critics who say you're wasting time on a horse that 3 professional trainers have already given up on?" Harlow leaned against the fence rail, watching Crimson Dawn graze peacefully in the distance. "Tell me, son, what's the hurry? Racing's about speed, sure, but it's also about trust. You can force a horse to run fast once or twice, but to run their heart out when it matters most, that requires something deeper. But surely you're not seriously considering entering her in competition? The county derby's in 6 months." Harlow said quietly, "Registration deadline's next Friday." Sterling's pen stopped moving. "The county derby? Mr. Crestfield, that race will feature horses worth more than most people's houses. Horses trained by professionals with decades of experience." "Yep, I imagine it will." That evening, Sterling's article appeared online under the headline, "Local Farmer Plans to Enter Auction Reject in Prestigious County Derby." The story went viral within hours, sparking debates in racing forums and drawing ridicule from established trainers. Beaumont Silverdust was quoted as saying, "This is exactly the kind of amateur nonsense that gives horse racing a bad name. Crestfield is setting that poor animal up for humiliation and possible injury." But not everyone was dismissive. Retired jockey Maverick Stonehaven, now in his 70s, read the article with interest. He remembered similar doubts when Seabiscuit had been written off as too small and too difficult. The next morning, he drove 3 hours to visit Harlow's farm unannounced. "Mind if an old-timer takes a look at your girl?" Maverick asked. For 20 minutes, he watched Crimson Dawn move around the paddock, his experienced eyes cataloging every detail. Finally, he nodded slowly. "She's got something," he told Harlow. "It's buried deep, but it's there. The question is whether you can bring it out in time." Winter brought both challenges and unexpected progress to Harlow's unconventional training program. While other stables focused on intensive speed work and stamina building, Harlow continued his patient approach, gradually earning Crimson Dawn's trust through consistency and respect rather than dominance and force. The turning point came during a December blizzard that knocked out power across Millbrook County. While Harlow checked on Crimson Dawn during the storm, he discovered her standing protectively over Jasper, his aging border collie, who had somehow gotten trapped in the paddock. The mare had positioned herself to shield the dog from the worst of the wind and snow. "Well, I'll be," Harlow whispered, approaching slowly through the swirling white. "You've got a guardian's heart, don't you, girl?" That night, as the 3 of them rode out the storm, together in the barn, Harlow wrapped in blankets, Crimson Dawn in her stall, and Jasper curled up on a pile of hay, something fundamental shifted in their relationship. When morning came and the snow cleared, Crimson Dawn approached Harlow directly for the first time, nuzzling his shoulder with genuine affection. Physical training began in earnest after New Year's, but always on the mare's terms. Harlow designed a program that worked with her natural instincts rather than against them. He noticed that she moved most freely during dawn and dusk, when shadows were long and the world was quiet. So those became their primary training times, instead of the harsh bits and heavy equipment favored by conventional trainers. Harlow used gentle guidance and positive reinforcement. He discovered that Crimson Dawn responded exceptionally well to variation. She seemed to grow bored with repetitive drills, but thrived when presented with new challenges each day. The local veterinarian, Dr. Oakley Riverbend, became an unwitting ally in Harlow's mission. During a routine checkup, she was surprised to find that Crimson Dawn's previously problematic limp had all but disappeared. "Whatever you're doing, it's working," Dr. Riverbend admitted, Her muscle development is actually quite impressive. And that old injury seems to have healed completely. The scar tissue is still there, but it's not limiting her range of motion anymore. Word of the mare's improvement spread through the racing community, though skepticism remained high. When Harlow officially entered Crimson Dawn in the County Derby, paying the substantial registration fee with money from selling his late wife's jewelry collection, the racing establishment treated it as an elaborate publicity stunt. He's already gotten more attention than that horse is worth, scoffed trainer Cordelia Brightwater during a radio interview. Mark my words, when race day comes, that amateur and his pet project will be lucky to finish it all. But not everyone was dismissing Harlow's chances. Lester Ironwood, a grizzled old handicapper who'd been analyzing races for 40 years, made a quiet pilgrimage to observe Crimson Dawn's morning workouts. What he saw intrigued him enough to place a small wager on the mare not to win, but to place in the top 3. There's something about how she moves, he confided to his nephew. It's not conventional, but it's efficient. And the way she responds to that farmer, I've never seen a connection quite like it. As spring training intensified, Harlow began working with volunteer jockey Nettie Clearwater, a young woman who'd been struggling to find mounts with established stables. At 19, she was considered too inexperienced for serious competition, making her a perfect match for Harlow's underdog operation. She doesn't like to be pushed, Harlow warned during their first training session together. But if you trust her instincts and give her room to work, she'll surprise you. Nettie's first ride on Crimson Dawn was a revelation. Unlike other horses she'd ridden, who required constant guidance and urging, Crimson Dawn seemed to anticipate her intentions, responding to the slightest shift in weight or touch of the reins. It's like she's reading my mind, Nettie told her parents that evening. I've never felt anything like it. By April, Crimson Dawn was consistently running competitive times in their private workouts. Though Harlow kept the exact numbers to himself, the racing world remained skeptical. But a small group of believers was beginning to form around the unlikely pair. The real test would come in 6 weeks, when 18 of the region's finest horses would line up for the most prestigious race in Millbrook County's history. 6 weeks before the County Derby, the racing world was buzzing with anticipation and disbelief in equal measure. The official field had been announced, featuring 17 thoroughbreds worth a combined $12 million and Crimson Dawn, the $500 reject who'd become the story everyone couldn't stop talking about. Media attention intensified. As race day approached, sports reporters descended on Millbrook County like locusts, setting up cameras outside Harlow's modest farm and ambushing him with questions. Every time he ventured into town, the pressure was unlike anything the quiet farmer had ever experienced. Mr. Crestfield called out Rochelle Somerville from Channel 7 Sports, thrusting a microphone toward his face as he left the feed store. Oddsmakers have placed Crimson Dawn at 200-1 odds to win. Some are calling this the biggest long shot in county racing history. How does that make you feel? Harlow paused, considering his words carefully. I reckon the only odds that matter are the ones Crimson Dawn believes in herself. The attention wasn't all negative. Fan mail began arriving from across the country, children's drawings of horses, letters from other amateur trainers sharing their own underdog stories, and small donations from supporters who believed in second chances. Harlow read every letter aloud to Crimson Dawn during their evening grooming sessions, but the pressure took its toll. 3 weeks before the race, during what should have been a routine training session, Crimson Dawn suddenly balked at the starting gate, something she hadn't done in months. Her old fears seemed to be returning as the stakes grew higher. Easy, girl, Harlow soothed, but he could feel her tension through the lead rope. What's got you spooked? The answer came the next morning when he discovered tire tracks near his property line and broken camera equipment hidden in the hedgerow. Someone had been secretly filming their training sessions, likely selling the footage to betting syndicates looking for any edge. Dr. Riverbend arrived that afternoon for an emergency consultation. She's not injured, she concluded after a thorough examination, but her stress levels are elevated. All this attention might be getting to her. Harlow made a difficult decision. For the final 3 weeks of preparation, He banned all media from his property and moved Crimson Dawn's training to dawn sessions, when curious onlookers were less likely to interfere. He also brought in Maverick Stonehaven as an unofficial advisor. Pressures. A funny thing, the old jockey observed, watching Crimson Dawn pace nervously in her stall. Some horses thrive on it, others crumble. The secret is helping her remember that none of this hoopla changes what she already knows she can do. Meanwhile, the established racing community was dealing with its own pressures. Beaumont's Silverdusts, prize stallion, Thunder's Edge, was considered the heavy favorite, but Beaumont found himself increasingly irritated by the constant questions about Harlow's circus act. This amateur nonsense is distracting from what should be a serious sporting competition, he complained to the Racing Commission. That farmer has no business putting an untested animal and an inexperienced jockey at risk in a race of this caliber. But Quinton Ashworth, the breeder who'd initially dismissed Harlow's purchase, was beginning to have second thoughts. His spies at the track had reported that Crimson Dawn's recent workout times were surprisingly competitive, even accounting for the short distance and controlled conditions. Maybe we underestimated that old farmer, he confided to his assistant. The mare's bloodline isn't terrible. Her grandsire won 3 stakes races back in the day. Sometimes the apple falls farther from the tree than you expect. As the final week arrived, Harlow implemented a media blackout, refusing all interview requests and focusing entirely on Crimson Dawn's mental preparation. He could sense that beneath her nervousness lay something powerful, a coiled spring of determination that was waiting for the right moment to release. The question was whether that moment would come when it mattered most. Young Nettie Clearwater was feeling the pressure too. At 19, she'd never ridden in a race with such high stakes and intense scrutiny. The other jockeys had decades of experience and multiple victories under their belts. Remember, Harlow told her during their final strategy session, "You're not riding against them, you're riding with her. Trust what you've learned about each other, and let everything else fade into background noise." The stage was set for what racing historians would later call the most unlikely championship story in Millbrook County's history. But first, they had to survive the greatest test of all, race day itself. Derby Day dawned crisp and clear, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of spring across Millbrook County Raceway. By sunrise, the parking lots were already filling with cars bearing license plates from 6 different states. The local population had swelled from 8,000 to nearly 30,000 overnight, as racing enthusiasts, curiosity seekers, and media personnel descended on the small community. Harlow arrived at the track at 5:30 a.m., 3 hours before the scheduled first race. Crimson Dawn stepped off the trailer with alert ears and bright eyes, showing none of the nervousness that had plagued her training sessions the previous week. It was as if returning to an actual racetrack environment had awakened something primal in her bloodline. "She looks different," observed Dr. Riverbend, who'd volunteered to serve as the mare's veterinarian for the day, more focused. "Like she suddenly understands what all the fuss has been about." The morning hours passed in a blur of preparation rituals, while other horses underwent elaborate warm-up routines. Supervised by teams of assistants, Harlow kept things simple. A gentle grooming session, a quiet walk around the paddock, and their traditional pre-race moment of silence, just the farmer and his horse, standing together in mutual understanding. By noon, the grandstands were packed beyond capacity. The County Derby had become must-see television, with 3 major networks providing live coverage and online betting sites reporting record volume. The story had captured imaginations far beyond the racing world. It was David versus Goliath with hoof beats and heartbreak. In the jockey's room, Nettie struggled with pre-race jitters that had nothing to do with competition and everything to do with not wanting to disappoint the thousands of people who were now believing in their impossible dream. Veteran jockey Cassius Goldleaf, who'd won the Derby twice before, offered unexpected encouragement. "Kid, I've been doing this for 22 years, and I've never seen a horse and rider more in sync than you two. Don't let the crowd noise get in your head out there. It's just you and the track." The post-parade began at 4:30 p.m., with each horse introduced to thunderous applause. When Crimson Dawn entered the track, The response was unlike anything anyone had witnessed. Half the crowd erupted in cheers while the other half fell into respectful silence. Watching this living embodiment of second chances prance past the grandstand, Beaumont's Silverdust watched from his private box, his confidence in Thunder's edge unwavering despite the emotional spectacle. Sentiment doesn't win races, he muttered to his guests. Breeding and training do. But down in the grandstand's general admissions section, retired postal worker Geneva Wyndham clutched her $20 betting ticket, one of thousands placed on Crimson Dawn to win. "Come on, sweetheart," she whispered. "Show them what happens when somebody believes in you." As the horses approached the starting gate, Harlow felt his heart rate accelerate for the first time all day. This was the moment he couldn't control, couldn't influence with patience or kindness. From here, it was up to Crimson Dawn and Nettie to justify 18 months of faith and preparation. The gate crew worked efficiently, loading 17 horses without incident. Crimson Dawn was assigned post position 12, near the middle of the field. Not ideal, but not disastrous either. She entered the gate calmly, her earlier starting gate phobia apparently forgotten. Track announcer Wellington Fairweather's voice boomed across the facility. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a full field of 18 magnificent thoroughbreds ready for the 127th running of the Millbrook County Derby, 1 mile and 1/8 for 3-year-olds, with a purse of $250,000. In the hushed moments before the start, Nettie leaned forward and whispered into Crimson Dawn's ear, "This is your moment, girl. Show them who you really are." The starting bell rang with a clarity that cut through 30,000 voices. Like a blade through silk, 18 horses burst from the gate in a thunderous explosion of speed and ambition, carrying with them the dreams of everyone who'd ever believed that sometimes the impossible was just another word for inevitable. The race that would redefine what was possible had officially begun. The break from the starting gate was clean and competitive, with the favored horses quickly establishing position while Crimson Dawn settled into 7th place, exactly where Harlow and Nettie had planned. The early pace was fast but not suicidal, set by Lightning's Fortune, a speedster known for blazing early quarters before fading in the stretch. Through the first quarter mile, Nettie kept Crimson Dawn relaxed and balanced, saving ground along the rail while avoiding the traffic that typically develops in large fields. The mare's stride was smooth and economical, covering ground with an efficiency that had become her signature during training. "Crimson Dawn is running comfortably in 7th, announced Wellington Fairweather, while the favorite Thunder's Edge has positioned himself perfectly in 4th, just behind the early leaders. As they approached the half-mile pole, the field began to string out according to talent and strategy. This was where many long shots began to fade, overwhelmed by the pace and pressure of championship-level competition. But Crimson Dawn seemed to be gaining strength, her breathing steady and her stride lengthening with each furlong. Nettie felt the mare beginning to pull at the reins, not from anxiety, but from eagerness to join the battle at the front. "Not yet, girl," she whispered. "We've got plenty of time." The crowd had fallen into that peculiar racing silence that precedes pandemonium. 30,000 people holding their collective breath as the field approached the far turn. In the expensive boxes, sophisticated handicappers began revising their expectations as they watched Crimson Dawn move steadily through the field without apparent effort. At the 3/4 pole, the race began in earnest. Thunder's Edge made his move, sweeping to the outside under veteran jockey Marcus Steelwater and quickly closing on the leaders. 2 other fancied horses, Midnight's Promise and Royal Decree, launched simultaneous bids from different parts of the track, but the most significant move was happening along the rail, where Nettie had found a seam between horses and was asking Crimson Dawn for her best effort. The response was immediate and breathtaking. The mare shifted into a gear that no one except Harlow had ever seen, her stride becoming longer and more powerful with each step. "Incredible," shouted Wellington Fairweather as the field straightened. "For home, Crimson Dawn has found racing room along the rail and is making up ground with every stride. She's 6th, now 5th, now 4th. In the grandstand, Geneva Wyndham was on her feet screaming, her betting ticket clutched against her chest like a prayer. Round her, thousands of other believers, were experiencing something that transcended mere sport, the pure joy of witnessing the impossible become inevitable. Down the stretch, Thunder's Edge had taken the lead and appeared to be drawing away, his superior breeding and conditioning telling in the final furlong. But outside of him, Crimson Dawn was flying. Her acceleration was otherworldly, as if 18 months of patient training had been building toward this single moment of explosive speed. She's gaining on Thunder's Edge. The announcer's voice cracked with excitement. Crimson Dawn is making up ground with every stride. It's Thunder's Edge and Crimson Dawn pulling away from the field. In the final 100 yards, it became a two-horse race that seemed to unfold in slow motion. Thunder's Edge, the $1 million champion, running on heart and reputation against Crimson Dawn, the $500 reject, running on dreams and determination. 50 yards from the finish line, they were head-and-head, their shadows intertwined. On the track surface, 25 yards out, Crimson Dawn inched ahead by a nose. With 10 yards remaining, she was a neck in front, her ears pinned back in concentration, her heart beating in perfect rhythm with Nettie's dot at the wire. Crimson Dawn hit the finish line a full length ahead of Thunder's Edge, with the rest of the field scattered behind them like the remnants of a beautiful dream. The crowd erupted in a sound unlike anything Millbrook County had ever heard. 30,000 voices raised in celebration of the most improbable victory in racing history. Grown men wept openly while children danced in the aisles, and even hardened racing professionals found themselves applauding with genuine emotion. In the winner's circle, as photographers captured the moment for posterity, Harlow stood beside his impossible champion with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Crimson Dawn, draped in the traditional blanket of roses, stood proudly between her trainer and jockey, finally understanding what she had been meant for all along. She never stopped believing in herself, Harlow told the assembled media, his voice thick with emotion. She just needed someone to believe with her. The victory purse of $150. Zero would secure Harlow's farm for years to come, but more importantly, Crimson Dawn had proven that sometimes the heart knows something that statistics and experts cannot measure. She had transformed from a $500 rejection into a champion, carrying with her the dreams of everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough. As the sun set over Millbrook County Raceway, casting long shadows across the track, where dreams had become reality, one truth remained crystalline clear. In a world obsessed with pedigree and prediction, sometimes the greatest victories belong to those who simply refuse to accept that the impossible must remain so. Crimson Dawn had not just won a horse race, she had won the right for every underdog, everywhere, to dream a little bigger and believe a little harder in the power of second chances.